You're listening to the Art of Making Home podcast with Sandro Stefanucci of Abstract Homes. He is a builder with over 37 years of experience in the industry. This series shows you the construction industry from the contractor's perspective. In addition, we will be discussing challenges that we have encountered and what other industry professionals can learn from those stories. We'll be covering such topics that many people do not consider before building, like what your property can allow. Is your property located on a steep hill? What will your municipality enable you to construct? It might not be as cut and dry as you think. So let's get the conversation started.
Hello, beautiful people. It's Sandro Stefanucci from Abstract Homes and Renovations. And thanks for joining us today on our podcast. Today's podcast, we have Khang Nguyen back with us again. We're talking about Vancouver and the zoning changes and everything regarding that and try to unravel some mysteries here. Before we get started, we do have a podcast that we did about a month and a half ago, 2 months ago, and Khang was on that explaining some of the proposed changes to the Vancouver zoning bylaws. Anyway, I'd like to thank Khang Nguyen for coming back on the show with us again. And so we have new updates with the Vancouver city, and we have Khang here to help us unravel that.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for having me. It's always fun to join you in these conversations. It's great to talk and to share insight. And, it's good. It's good fun.
Yeah, no, thank you for coming on. I appreciate that. We know there's some changes right now already, again, from the last time we talked about the changes and zoning changes there in Vancouver. I'm hearing now that even other municipalities are starting to do more zoning changes because obviously the government on the higher levels, provincial government and even the federal government want to start densifying areas. So now there's more of a push to densify those areas that might have low density in a neighborhood.
The two main aspects of the changes relate to the single family zone in Vancouver. So the two major changes are the simplification of the single family zone. They're looking at consolidating all the RS or the single family zones into one zone. Currently there's, RS1, RS2, RS7, RS5, and they all have nuances and they all have little particular aspects to them that just, make it hair-pullingly difficult to go through. So they're simplifying all those rules into one consolidated zone, a single R, I believe they're calling it RR1. So a single zone for all single family residential construction. That's the first aspect of it. The second aspect of it is they're looking at allowing for multiple dwelling units. So basically a multiplex to be built in place of a single family home in this zone, in this new consolidated zone. And that mandate to allow for more housing choice and greater housing numbers is coming down from both the provincial and the federal government. Now, the interesting thing is all municipalities have parts of their city that already allow for a medium density building. For example, in our city here in Vancouver, if you look at the RM zones or the RT zones, there are these, 3 or 4 story apartment buildings in Kitsilano. You see them around City Hall. They already exist, right?
Right.
So now the idea is that these buildings will be more prevalent throughout the city, even in the single family zones. It's already present. The big question is, how do we do it in a way where it's not a drastic effect on the single family house that you might be building right beside? And I think that's the challenge, is that, you dump one of these stubbies beside a small pre-1940s character home,
right?
How that's going to impact that home. And obviously over time, I think the entire city will eventually become, a higher density, because that's just the future of cities.
Right.
But yeah, in the meantime, I think we'll have some disgruntled neighbors and some disgruntled homeowners that just don't like these big buildings beside them. But the reality is that it's needed. And so it's up to the design firms and the architects in the city here to kind of do it in a way where we're recognizing that there's potentially this contrast in building size and to design these new buildings as best as we can to fit. And you're right, only time will tell to see how it all plays out.
the homeowner, whoever's listening to this, may have a property in Vancouver and they're thinking, what can I do? This still doesn't make any sense to me. So maybe because everything hasn't been actually finalized and the ink hasn't even dried on anything yet. Say I want to max out. I got this 33 by 121 lot in Vancouver. I want to max out on it. What could I do?
Okay, so let's start from the beginning. If you have a 33 by 122 lot, which is a standard lot in the city, the zoning will allow you to do either a single family house with a laneway, with or without a laneway. And we can get into like the details of the square footage and FSR later, but at a high level, you can build a single house with or without a laneway. You can build a duplex. If the house that is the existing house on that property, if it's a pre-1940s character house, you can opt to retain it and renovate it and build up to a triplex with an infill. So 4 units, right? So that's 3 units in the renovated existing house and then a single detached infill in the back, all stratified, so 4 units. Or the new regulation for multiplex is you can build up to 4 units. So those are your options. And then in terms of square footage, the multiplex, you can build 1.0 FSR or 100% of the lot, meaning if that lot's a 33 by 122, for about a 4,000, 2,600 square foot lot. So you can build a 4,000 square foot multiplex. You do the character retention process or option, you're max at 0.85, so 85% of the lot. If you do a duplex, you're maxed out at 0.7 or 70%.
Right.
And here's the big one that I think everyone should be really aware of. And really, a lot of people would be affected by this. So I feel like this is the big one. They're looking at downgrading the square footage for a single family house. So currently, you're allowed to build 0.7. And they're proposing to downgrade that to 0.6, which I think is a wrong move. It's a terrible idea. But what they're suggesting is that you can build a bigger laneway. So they're upping the laneway from 0.16 up to 0.25. I find that's not a good trade-off. And so they're saying that we're going to reduce the main house, but we're going to allow the laneway to be increased. But I think what should happen is they should say that you can choose to either max out the house at 0.7 or max out the laneway at 0.25, and the total square footage for the lot remains the same at 0.85. So that's what they really should be doing versus maxing the house out at 0.6. So I think for any listeners out there, I think the big thing is to write in to City Hall and the councillors really about that 0.6. It shouldn't be 0.6. They should keep it at 0.7 and allow the laneway to be flexible between 0.16 and 0.25, depending on how big you want your main house.
Right. Maybe you could just tell us the difference between a laneway and an infill.
Yeah, it's all referring to the same type of building, which is a building at the back of your property in place of the garage. And the difference between a laneway and an infill is really just a definition difference from the city of Vancouver's bylaws. So a laneway house cannot be stratified. It's an ancillary building to the principal dwelling. And so if you were to build a laneway, you cannot stratify and sell it. Whereas if you build an infill, say in the case of a character retention project, or in a multiplex option, right? So in a multiplex option, you can build an infill. Infills can be stratified and sold separately. So that's the main difference. It's referring to the same type of building, but it's just a definition of whether or not you can sell it or not.
Right.
Or stratify it or not.
When you talked about the fourplexes and building those units on there, so can you still build a laneway or an infill, considering that's the 4th unit on the property?
Yes. At a high level, the multiplex regs allow for up to 4 units. So the minimum is 3, the maximum is 4 on a 33. When you get to a 50, the minimum is 5, and the maximum is 8. But if you go to 8, you need to provide that building as an all rental building. And again, this might all change, and the final regs need to come out still. But if we're talking about, say, just a 33-foot lot, then you can build a 3-unit building, or you can build a 4-unit building. And so your options to build 3 or 4 units could be all within one building, right? So all 4 units could be in one building, or you can choose to do 3 units in the main building and then the 4th unit as an infill building in the back.
As far as prices like to build, that's not going to change. Mm-hmm. If anything, it's just going to cost more as we move on in time. Obviously, it's not, it just costs less because you're not building 4,000 square feet, you're building 1,000 square feet, or you're building the total building. If we maxed out and we built 4,000 square feet on this property, obviously dividing that, say 4 ways, if you will, obviously that's going to make it more palatable for people to be able to do that. But you still got to come up with the money to build that. Yeah, absolutely. The question of affordability, I don't think is ever going to get resolved. I think that the solution really that these multiplexes provide is that there's more units within a lot, and that lot is better utilized, and it allows someone to buy a smaller unit for a less costly price versus buying a whole lot, right? An entire lot. They're buying a portion of that lot at a lower rate. So the dollar per square foot is the same. You know what I mean? Like, you're paying exactly. We're thinking you're still paying over $1,000 a square foot for these units, but you can buy a 400 square foot unit. So whether that's affordable or not is a big question. It's just, there's more units available. There's various sizes that are available that will hopefully meet various budgets. You're in a low rise ground oriented building versus a condo high rise. And I think the whole point is just more housing choice, right? So it's not so much, you can either pick a condo or you can buy a whole single family lot. Now it's you can buy a condo, you can buy a smaller portion of a lot, you can buy a bit bigger of a duplex, or you can still buy the single family lot. I always pose a press question now too is developers. I see the potential for developers coming in now once this gets passed and then buying up these properties, knowing the value of them after, so right now it might be reasonable if you think about what you can do to that property to develop it. People might not be on, I could see that another price spike. Once everybody starts doing this, I can really see that going up again. So now we have properties that are valuable to developers. For sure. And like I've been saying this, my colleagues and friends and developers and even some people who work at the city who can have the patience to listen to me. But this policy is too late. This should have been done 10 years ago. This should have been done at a time when property values were much lower and construction costs are much lower, because now construction costs are the highest they've ever been. Yeah. Land values are the highest they've ever been. And so on top of that, you've got developers coming in now looking to charge even more for the final product. So the final product now is going to be too expensive, most likely, for most people. It's a great policy at a high level, but it's too late. It's like 10 years too late. They should have really gotten their act together. They should have been more confident about densification 10, 15 years ago. And these units should be available and built at that price point back then, available right now. But that's not the case. So now we're dealing with these units at a higher price. Yeah, no, I agree with you on that, but it's too late now, obviously. And now we're having to deal with it. And they're scrambling, trying to fix something that's broken that might not ever get fixed. Thanks, Khang, for joining us. And thank you guys for listening to this podcast. Take care. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks, guys. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you soon for sure.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of The Art of Making Home with Sandro Stefanucci from Abstract Homes. Make sure you keep following every episode to learn his advice about the building industry here in the Lower Mainland. He will have great tips on following episodes when it comes to building or renovating your home. Make sure to follow us on Spotify, Google Podcasts, and of course, Apple Podcasts, so you don't miss his latest construction advice. If you want more information on Abstract Homes, all you have to do is go to their website, abstracthomes.com. Talk to you next time.